Welcome to Ethos Trek. Today's episode is what I hope will be the first of many education conversations. My name is Sera, and I've spent the last 25 years in the college classroom, watching higher education evolve, adapt, and increasingly find itself under scrutiny. This is the first episode of what I hope will be an ongoing series where we dig into the real issues facing education today. Today's topic is fundamental to everything we do in higher education: critical thinking. But this isn't just going to be an abstract discussion about pedagogy. We're going to explore why critical thinking has become controversial, why it threatens certain political interests, and why colleges and universities are increasingly under attack for doing exactly what they're supposed to do: teach students how to think, not what to think. Let me start with the basics, because critical thinking has become one of those phrases that gets thrown around so much it almost loses meaning. Critical thinking is the disciplined process of actively analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to guide belief and action. It's not about being negative or cynical. Critical here means careful and discerning. It involves questioning assumptions, including your own, examining evidence. Is it credible? Is it sufficient? Considering alternative explanations. What else could account for this? Identifying logical fallacies. Where does the reasoning break down? Recognizing bias, both in sources and in ourselves. Drawing reasoned conclusions based on evidence, not emotion or preconception. In my classroom, critical thinking means I don't want students to simply memorize what I tell them. I want them to challenge readings, to question methodologies, to ask, how do we know this? And what might we be missing? The best moment in teaching is when a student respectfully but confidently challenges something I've said and backs it up with solid reasoning. That's critical thinking in action. Here's where things get interesting and controversial. Critical thinking is fundamentally antithetical to indoctrination. They cannot coexist. Indoctrination is about accepting ideas uncritically. It's about teaching people what to think, not how to think. It relies on appeal to authority. Believe this because I said so. Discouraging questions, presenting one perspective as the only valid view. Punishing dissent. Emotional manipulation over logical reasoning. Critical thinking does the opposite. It demands questioning authority. No idea gets a free pass. Encouraging questions, even the uncomfortable ones. Exposing students to multiple perspectives. Rewarding intellectual courage. Privileging evidence and logic over emotional appeals. Now, here's the irony that's not lost on those of us in higher education. Colleges and universities are constantly accused of indoctrination, usually by people who want to see education look much more like actual indoctrination. When we teach students to evaluate sources, to recognize propaganda techniques, to understand how statistics can be manipulated, to question power structures, that's not indoctrination. That's the opposite. We're giving students tools to resist indoctrination from any source, including from us. Let's be direct about why critical thinking has become politicized. An electorate that thinks critically is harder to manipulate. Full stop. When citizens can fact-check claims in real time, or recognize logical fallacies in campaign speeches, understand how gerrymandering works, analyze economic data for themselves, identify false equivalences in media coverage, distinguish between correlation and causation. They become much harder to control through fear, misinformation, and simplistic narratives. The current political landscape, and I'm speaking specifically about the GOP's trajectory over recent years, increasingly relies on discouraging exactly these skills. We see anti-intellectualism as a badge of honor. Expertise is dismissed as elitism. Attacks on objective reality, alternative facts, and fake news as shields against criticism. Conspiracy thinking is elevated. Complex problems given simple, villainous explanations. Emotional reasoning is prioritized. I feel this is true. Trumps evidence. In-group, out-group dynamics. You're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground. This isn't about conservative versus liberal ideology. Traditional conservatism has a rich intellectual tradition. William F. Buckley, Russell Kirk, and others engaged in rigorous critical debate. But what we're seeing now is different. It's a movement that increasingly requires its followers to accept contradictory claims simultaneously, to distrust their own perception, to reject expert consensus on everything from climate science to election security. That requires an electorate that has not been trained in critical thinking. In fact, it requires active resistance to critical thinking, which brings us to the present moment and the current administration's attacks on colleges and universities. These aren't random or coincidental, they're strategic. We're seeing several coordinated efforts. One, delegitimizing higher education institutions. The rhetoric has been consistent. Colleges are indoctrination centers. Professors are radicals. Education makes people worse. These aren't evidence-based claims. They're narrative building designed to undermine trust in institutions that teach critical thinking. Two, threats to accreditation and funding. The current administration has proposed everything from eliminating the Department of Education to threatening the accreditation of universities that don't comply with political demands. When you control funding and accreditation, you control curriculum. This is the very definition of political interference in education. 3. Attacks on academic freedom. We're seeing unprecedented efforts to dictate what can be taught in classrooms, banning topics prohibiting discussions of historical facts that make people uncomfortable, requiring political litmus tests for hiring. These directly undermine the critical examination of ideas. 4. The DEI elimination orders. Setting aside the merits of specific DEI programs, the wholesale elimination of anything labeled as diversity initiatives is about controlling discourse. It's about deciding which perspectives students are exposed to, which is, again, antithetical to critical thinking that requires exposure to multiple viewpoints. 5. Loyalty over expertise. We've seen this administration prioritize political loyalty over subject expertise in educational policy positions. This sends a clear message. Ideology matters more than knowledge, conformity more than competence. You might be thinking, this is just politics. It'll swing back. But I want to be clear about what's at stake. Democracy requires an educated citizenry, capable of critical thought. The founders understood this. Jefferson wrote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be." When we undermine higher education, we're not just attacking institutions. We're attacking the pipeline that produces informed voters who can evaluate candidates and policies, professionals who solve complex problems, citizens who can distinguish truth from propaganda, people who can adapt to changing economic and technological landscapes. The attack on universities is ultimately an attack on the idea that evidence, expertise, and reasoned debate should guide our society. It's a preference for authority, tradition, and intuition over analysis. And here's what concerns me the most. Once you've convinced a population that thinking critically is actually a form of corruption, that expertise is suspect, that questioning is disloyalty, you've created conditions where democracy itself becomes vulnerable. So what do we do? I don't have all the answers, but I have some thoughts. For educators, double down on teaching critical thinking, explicitly and unapologetically. Model intellectual humility. Admit when we don't know something. Expose students to genuinely diverse viewpoints, including ones we disagree with. Make our reasoning transparent so students can see how we evaluate claims. Defend academic freedom, not as a privilege, but as a necessity. For students, practice critical thinking on everything, including what your professors tell you. Seek out perspectives that challenge your assumptions. Learn to distinguish between being offended and being wrong. Value truth over comfort, even when it's your own beliefs being questioned. For citizens, support higher education institutions and the faculty within them. Demand evidence-based policy over ideology-driven mandates. Call out anti-intellectualism wherever you see it. Remember that education is not indoctrination. It's liberation. For everyone, read widely, especially sources you disagree with. Ask questions. How do we know this? What's the evidence? What might we be missing? Resist the urge to dismiss expertise simply because it's inconvenient. Critical thinking isn't a political position. It's a cognitive skill. It's not liberal or conservative. It's essential. The fact that it's become controversial tells us something deeply troubling about our current moment. As someone who's spent 25 years watching students grow from uncertain freshmen into confident, thoughtful graduates, I can tell you this. Teaching critical thinking doesn't turn students into radicals of any stripe. It turns them into adults who can navigate complexity, who aren't easily fooled, who can change their minds when evidence warrants it. That's threatening to anyone whose power depends on an unquestioning following. It's essential for everyone who believes in democracy. In future episodes, we'll dig into other aspects of education under pressure, from the adjunctification of faculty to the student debt crisis to the changing role of technology in learning. But I wanted to start here because critical thinking is foundational to all of it. Thank you for listening to this education conversation. If you want to continue this discussion, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically, especially about what I've told you today. This is Ethos Trek, and I'm Sera. I'll be back in a few days.